Every choice builds character. On the Virtuosity podcast, we explore how to make every day a rep toward excellence. I'm Corey, your host and co-founder of Virtuosity. My journey into character development began in sport, where I discovered that strengthening my character didn't just improve my performance, it transformed my entire life. Since then, I've been gripped with understanding how we can intentionally build character to fuel both personal and professional success. At Virtuosity, we believe character is like a muscle. It needs consistent training. That's why we've built a research-based system that acts as your character gym, making character development practical, scalable, and accessible, even within the largest organizations. On this podcast, we sit down with participants from our flagship Virtuosity program, where individuals commit to a full year of daily character development powered by Virtuosity. Our guests will share why character matters to them, how they're applying it in their personal and professional lives, and the insights they've gained along the way. We hope these conversations challenge, inspire, and equip you with new ways to integrate character into your own journey. Subscribe to stay up to date with our weekly episodes, and if something resonates, share it with your friends and colleagues. Ready to start your own Virtuosity journey? Download the Virtuosity Character app or visit virtuositycharacter.ca to learn more. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 10th episode of the Virtuosity podcast. If you're new here, check out our launch episode with Mary Crossan for a powerful introduction to this series. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Adelle Wapnick as our guest. Adelle was born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa. She studied English at the University of Witwatersrand, a university historically known for its resistance to apartheid. After completing her degrees, she began a 30-year career in advertising, co-founding her own agency. In 2014, recognizing it no longer aligned with her evolving purpose, she sold the agency to Interrepublic Group and transitioned into a second career as an executive coach. Adelle completed her master's in coaching and consulting for change through Oxford University and HEC Paris, where she connected with Professor Mary Crossan and developed a keen interest in the role of leader character. In 2023, US Insider named her one of the top 3 coaches to watch globally. She is currently pursuing a PhD that explores the intersection of character and coaching, seeking to embed these ideas more deeply into organizations and institutions, particularly as South Africa continues to shape its democratic identity. For the past decade, Adelle has also served on the board of Surgeons for Little Lives, a pediatric NGO based at the Chris Hani Baragwanath Academic Hospital in Soweto, south of Johannesburg, where she was one of its founding members, a role she considers among the most meaningful of her career. All right, so Adelle, the question that I typically start asking all of our guests is, why does character matter to you?
Thanks. I was raised by parents who were very strict, and they taught us right from wrong and were very progressive in a society that we grew up in that was very unequal. So our household had long conversations about justice and fairness, humanity. It was always a topic of conversation. So there was that one angle. And then for me personally, I think it matters because I believe that it's the foundation of trust and respect. It shapes how I show up in the world, the choices I make, how I handle challenges, the people I hang out with, how I treat others. And I think it's because in the end, it's not really about what we achieve in this life, but who we are. And I truly believe that defines a meaningful life well led. So for me, it's the basis of everything.
Yeah, I that totally resonates. We've been talking about character as like these meta habits that influence all other habits, whether it's skills, competencies, or just, who you are is how you do everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I know that your big interests around character are really around character and democracy and character and coaching, actually. And so I'll want to get to both of those at a high level just so the listeners know where we're going. But why don't we start with the democracy part? How do you feel character could be really foundational in shaping a healthy democracy? And especially you're based in South Africa, looking at a more kind of a younger democracy like South Africa.
I think that the situation is extremely complex. So I have to be careful in how I answer that in terms of the answers for what a democracy or a younger democracy might represent in the growth of character or in the realm of character. So if I look at something like Canada, where you based, or the UK, those are very old democracies, countries that have been going for years, where institutions are entrenched, they're well run, and we know that there are faults in them, but they're basically very well run, etc. What's happened is we've gone through a transition from a very authoritarian, unfair past. I mean, it's beyond injustice and unfairness, etc. But I do think that it's made us extremely vulnerable to institutional weakness as a result of having gone through that. So there's been a lot of personalization of power. There's been a lack of robust and independent oversights and in mechanisms that have been created to have that oversight. And in our country specifically, it's resulted in state capture, systemic corruption. It's very evidential that it hasn't been good. And whether I can correlate it to a young democracy or not is quite debatable. So I'm not entirely sure. And as I say, I don't want to think that I've got the answers through character, through a very complex history. But I do think that it's not just something that we could look at as beneficial. I believe it's a critical component, an essential component of how we take our young democracy forward. So, integrity as a counter to corruption, or accountability and moral courage to challenge the status quo. Or another one might be justice and fairness to rebuild those institutions. Humility and humanity to reconnect with citizenship. Because I think what's happened as well is that many South Africans feel alienated by the state, because it seems to just serve a certain elite who's come through exile and elders that have gone through the pain and trauma, and it hasn't really served the people. So I think that it's critical, it's essential, but I don't deem to know all the answers as a result of the history being so complex. So I'm quite careful of how I correlate it all.
Yeah, that's I really love that, and what you're talking about at the end in terms of how it serves the people. I think sometimes when we think about something like democracy, it seems so big and it takes this almost like systems level approach. And one of the critiques around character is that it's overly individualistic and it doesn't take into account the systems level of things. And I often respond, and a lot of character scholars would respond in the sense that systems are made up of people, though. And if we want to change the systems, the way we do that is by changing the people that enable the change of systems. And so I definitely see, if we look at the development of character, that enables people to see how systems could be designed differently. Is that kind of how you're seeing things, or how do you see that relationship between character and like a big system like democracy?
I do. And I think what you're saying is critical. I think that, just to go back to South Africa before I go to the theory of what you're saying, South Africa is, if you look at sort of something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as simplistic as that, when you have a country that is by and large unemployed, a very youthful country that's unemployed, who are still seeking, they're jobless, and so therefore they're seeking financial well-being that might include food, a roof over their heads, basic education, clothing. I think that sometimes character feels a far stretch, and yet it shouldn't be, because from a humanity point of view, and certainly as you say, an individual point of view, one can still have character in poverty. So I'm not suggesting, again, that there's a correlation between people that are impoverished to lacking character, and therefore they don't want to look at it. When I was in business, prior to being an executive coach, we had a housekeeper in our agency, and his name was Judas. He was the most remarkable human being. And we had a situation where we had a large staff complement, and we offered toast in the morning. We were called the House of Toast. So we had toast, and everyone could have peanut butter and jam and, whatever they wanted. And suddenly we noticed there was diminished bread and clearly someone was thieving or taking and everything. And I said to him, Judah, there are people in our world and our society that need, and maybe people are taking bread home because they've got a cousin and an uncle or somewhere. I mean, they were all paid, but you don't know circumstances. And I said to him, and he said to me, no, he said, doesn't matter. He said, he called me Mama Adele. He said, no, Mama, no. He said, you don't steal it. You come to me and you ask me if you would canter. And so I had a meeting and that sort of points to the question of, that individual thing that can still hold character for people, regardless of what they call it, regardless of we might have the fancy linguistics and the theory, but actually there are people filled with character in their daily actions. Having said that, I do think that systems, what you're saying is that systems with those individuals in them can be better shaped to accommodate for growth of character and personal development around that ethos. So yes, I agree with you. I think there's the both and, where you have the individual and you also have the systemic stuff, which is kind of where you're leading to on the executive coaching.
So, what you're saying about, that character is accessible to everyone. When I was doing a program at Oxford, I had students challenge this idea that perhaps character is a privilege, that sometimes people in systems that are under-resourced or underprivileged may not have access to the same character development. And when you look at the 7 strategies that we use in our program, even if you look at that one strategy, which is being a role model, do you have role models around you that demonstrate strength of character? So you start to see that in the systems or the opportunities, tools, resources that are created for you to develop character. And so it's this funny line between, yes, character is accessible to everyone, but do you have the deliberate resources and tools to develop character that may not be accessible to everyone? And so, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we've created Virtuosity, is to try and democratize character development, because it should be available to everyone. And again, anyone can develop it, but it is this idea of where are the resources, the role models, etc. So it's a funny one to contemplate.
And I think it's very pertinent for South Africa because there is such a dearth of good education. So, I mean, in terms of our history, the education certainly is improving and it's not where it should be. And in the private sector, in private education, it's excellent. It's top in the world. Certainly our tertiary education is exceptional. But I think that if you look at sort of grassroots education levels, there's still, basic education is still not where it should be. And if you don't have the language for it, sometimes people grapple with it. And yet, as you say, having said that, there is the chance that just as a natural byproduct of where you grow up, who you encounter it through the exemplars that you have in your life. That and I think exemplars like we've had, which is Desmond Tutu, Mandela, we have had exceptional exemplars. If you were to look and ask me the question of the moment that I would witness strong character leadership making a real difference in our country, the biggest moment of my life was when Nelson Mandela was released and what he represented. I mean, he absolutely epitomized leader character. All of his traits. If you look at our framework and the one that you and your Mary do, he has integrity. Sorry, I'm so sad that I have to talk in the past. His humanity, his justice, collaboration, humility, accountability, drive, transcendence. If you look at all of them, his judgment at the center, he was phenomenal. And not to say that he was an exceptional administrator of government. So yes, maybe there were things that people would go, but he was a lawyer. He didn't have experience in an administration of governments and institutions. What he did have was an incredible vision, and using all of those character traits that we know about through Virtuosity, he exemplified all of them. Yeah, and I think that he negotiated a completely peaceful transition in his judgment as a result of being that character. We could have had a civil war in this country, justifiably had a civil war. And yeah, he disabled the apartheid system through his character and through the people he surrounded himself with, etc., to support that. But yeah, it was a privilege to witness.
Yeah, and the strength of character that he had, do you feel like it influenced the people around him? Sometimes we talk about character contagion and how your transcendence can activate transcendence in others, your humanity can activate humanity in others. Did you see that kind of ripple effect of his character kind of activating character in others?
Absolutely. Absolutely. On the rugby field, in Parliament, in groups of people. And people had this thing that when he walked into a room, energetically, he had an unbelievable presence and a calming effect. And I think one thing to say, however, is that he was incredibly driven. So there's this thing that goes, moral ethics, justice, accountability, all these things in terms of where character can grow, and is identified primarily in lay terms. But there's a drive component that we know that constitutes part of this framework and what character is about. And he had enormous drive. He actually apparently had quite a ferocious temper that when he wanted something to happen, he kind of really wanted it to happen. So it wasn't in the guise of placid kind of, I'm all okay. And, so that accountability and drive was really high in him. But he did it in a manner, even though there might have been those moments, he did it in a manner with complete humanity, transcendence. So I think that he had followers that you would never have expected. And that's how he was able to really turn a lot of people that were in the room that may have opposed him for fear of being a terrorist organization, never. But he turned them in that room. So yes, I do think it is contagious, very much so. And there are people that criticized him for calming it to the effect that maybe there wasn't enough of a celebration, there wasn't enough of a moment of freedom in front of Parliament, union buildings, absolutely crying shouts of freedom, because he quelled it quite well. But I suppose he wanted to avoid that civil war and keep peace in the country. And so that transcendence was an enormous component of what he envisaged.
And for a country to elect someone like Nelson Mandela, like what do you think that said about the people of South Africa at the time? Because oftentimes I look at the leaders that do get elected across different countries, and ultimately it is the people that are electing that leader. So what do you think? Was it about South Africa, the timing, the people that saw, and what did they see in Nelson Mandela, and particularly perhaps through the lens of character, but other contextual factors as well? What do you think those people saw to elect him at that time?
I think, and this is going to sound sort of, what would you say, not as academic as one might answer.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is something about the people of this country that mirror him.
Mm-hmm.
When and if you ever came here, you would understand the degree to which the people of South Africa are the most amazingly spiritual, deep, wonderful, warm people. There's a character here as a nation that has come through this. They call it Ubuntu, which is the togetherness, and it takes a village to raise a child, and there's this rainbow nation. And they've come about, that language has come about for a real reason. It hasn't come from nowhere. And when you engage with people in our country, the high levels of forgiveness, the high levels of, what would you call it, humanity, collaboration in Ubuntu, etc., I think that a lot of people felt that he mirrored them. And I think that there was this natural inclination and a relief in someone that you could find trust and respect because of his behavior. People could suddenly relate to that level of vision and integrity and fairness in the language he used, etc. So it was partly him surprising them in some ways, that kind of this new person was there as an option. And in other ways, I think the people mirrored him. And it was like a reciprocity in a way that is a bit spiritual, not entirely academic.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so lovely. I love this idea of mirroring. And so I know that this is a really big area of interest for you, in the sense that you're exploring that this could be a potential PhD topic for you. Do you want to share some of the questions that you would love to tackle in potential research that you'd be doing in this area?
Well, I think that initially I thought that I should do the work, continue the work that you've done and bring it into a young democracy and bring it into our environment and do something along the lines of exploring these very questions you've been asking me now. Reasons for someone that is an exemplar for people. What does it mean? Is there any difference in the kind of character frameworks that you've developed that might be different in Southern Africa, etc., and on the continent of Africa, which is a completely kind of largely ignored continent, mistakenly ignored. So I kind of thought that that would be something. And then having had conversations with yourselves and also with other academics here, going into the public sector, thinking that you can kind of make these changes is, I think, lacks humility, to be quite honest. It's like there's an arrogance to that. It's like, how can you go into a system that, as I mentioned, is so complex and think that you are going to do studies in order to shift what you believe is needed for a country? I mean, I think there's a total arrogance in that. So I think I was leaning more with conversations around what do I do and where have I come from? And having had 10 years in executive leadership with the most remarkable people in our country, I've realized that an avenue to explore this and language it into systemic or systems might be through executive coaching. So what does it look like if you were an executive coach with a character leadership lens, and look at it to see if eventually you could kind of bring that into systems in a more natural coaching environment rather than a lecturing, trying to change it from the top, but you kind of grow it into systems through coaching and being on lots of panels and running panels of coaches. The opportunity then for what that might look like becomes really exciting.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting about that approach is, as you're coaching, and it sounds like you're working with, high-level leaders, and they start to see the impact of character in their own lives, it starts to then become a top-down effect where you are working with the leadership and they might start to embed character from the top down. So it's a very, very interesting approach. And like you said, drawing on your own expertise in coaching, marrying up the several interests that you have. I think it's such a phenomenal idea that you have developing.
Yeah. And I've watched your history in Canada around this topic and watching, firefighting and the revenue service, the degree to which they've inculcated and embedded it into all the systems and the processes and the recruitment and the talent retention and I think that is a phenomenal way in which you can, because one of the things I am noticing going through this process myself is that there's a thing around, you can use these big words, justice, temperance, integrity. But going through it with you on the program, I'm starting to realize the depth at which character goes to. It's not just a bunch of words. And it's been hard for me. And if I tell you, when I describe myself to people, probably quite arrogantly, I'll say I've got lots of integrity. I'm very courageous. I'm driven. I collaborate. Maybe not so much humble, humanity, maybe not such good temperance. In fact, don't look at my children, I've got no temperance. Transcendence, I come from a creative environment, so I can say these things. But now that I'm going through the process with you, I'm realizing the degree to which it kind of feels like words, unless you go into the depth of it, of what it means to behave like that. Like, what are on a continuum of integrity, being completely rigid all the way to not caring, or whatever it is that these sort of opposite ends of the word might mean. And I really think that a lot of the leaders I deal with would echo what I'm saying like I'm saying it. They are highly integritous. They really are. High levels of justice. A lot of them are humane and they are accountable and they're amazing people with very sound judgment. I mean, they're all analytical, decisive, intuitive. They think they're those. But character goes a lot deeper. And holding the line on character is quite tenuous. Mm-hmm. So I think bringing it in on a sort of more depth and into those systems would really, really make a difference, both to those organizations in the private sector and then eventually kind of infiltrating a country deeply in need of it.
And so I'm going to come back to coaching specific question, but I want to keep unpacking this idea that you're sharing around how much more depth there is to character than you think. And so we just came out of a month focusing on integrity. Was there some depth or aha moments that you experienced over the last month with whichever focus behavior you were focusing on integrity? Or is there another example that has stood out in prior months with a different dimension?
This month on integrity was the biggest one for me so far, and it's the one that I describe myself the most as having, ironically. So I chose the dimension we had the dimension of integrity, and then I chose consistency. So I'm a bit ADD, maybe very. And so what happens in my process is that I've always got a higher moral ground as to the reasons I can't fulfill something. Firstly, I'm highly driven and I'm extremely busy with multiple, I'm a hybrid model. So I do strategy, I do executive coaching, I have a business. So there's this thing around me which is always busy. And prioritizing a day is extremely difficult. It's like, what do I do first and who? And so I'm always trying to balance my accountability and how I achieve the things I need to achieve for people and for myself. And I think I'm really inconsistent. And I got a real big surprise at the degree to which, when I was interrogating it for the month, I realized, what is it about me that makes the excuse that the consistency isn't that important because I'm such a busy person doing so much? Which, again, there's a lack of humility in that. Because are you so busy that even the smallest thing you may not achieve for someone else, it may be critically important to them, even though you deem it not to be a priority on your list, for them it's extremely important. And so I've really been grappling with this. And then when we were talking in yesterday's session with the whole big cohort, and we were having a conversation in our breakaways, I actually had another aha moment, which was that I'm not always so consistent with myself either, which is a whole other level of self-integrity. Because if I say to myself, I'm going to do this or that, like I want to do the PhD, great. So now I'm going to do that. Now, how consistent am I going to be in progressing? Or if I want to exercise, okay, I've been twice, but now I haven't been again because, hey, I'm really, really busy. Meantime, I know for my own health, it's critically important. So I think absolutely. And that's the depth which we're talking about, where you can look at the word integrity and think, no, I behave with integrity. I'm candid, I'm transparent, I'm principled. And then you look at one of the components of it and you realize, I'm not as good as I think I am. So yes, I think it's been happening every month with each component or dimension. But integrity for me this month was an amazing, really, really deep process for me.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that the depth is coming out. And I'm always surprised every month too. Like, this is stuff that I talk about all the time. But when you do the deep daily work, it's amazing that the development never ends. And in past podcast episodes, we've talked about like a moving goalpost. Like, you think that you're getting closer, you think that you're kind of getting towards that 10 out of 10, but then you start to see so much more room for improvement. And for me this month, and I was sharing this on the session yesterday, I was really surprised when I was focusing on being candid. That was the element of integrity I chose to focus on. It was funny that it wasn't necessarily finding out more about candor, but I started realizing that there are other weaknesses and dimensions that I wasn't aware of that weren't supporting my candor. So I had shared that I was really worried about being candid in the sense that it could become belligerent or rude or mean, because I started realizing I'm not sure I have the humanity to support that. So when I say challenging things to people, how can I be sure that it's going to come off in a compassionate way if I don't have the compassion to support it? And so it was a bit of an aha moment. Like, I've always known my humanity isn't my strongest dimensions, but it started to really look at, wow, it's a lot weaker than I thought it was. And it's actually holding back my ability to be candid. And so it is the interconnected nature too of the framework that we find, even as we do a deep dive into one element each month. It continues to surprise me as well.
Absolutely, because without accountability, which is another dimension, it's like, well, how do you remain consistent if you don't? And also even humility. If you don't have those to sort of counteract it or to look at it and mitigate that thing in you, how do you ever rectify it or look and see, okay, if it is that and I'm finding it problematic, what do I do and what do I raise in myself in order to adjust so that I do become what I want to become and who I want to become? Absolutely. And I think it is. I think it's it's a lifelong journey. But I do think that what I'm learning on the program is giving me an incredible um, level of depth in what character really means. So it's been phenomenal for me, absolutely phenomenal. Life-changing, there's no question.
I'm so glad. And when you think about the coaching piece, so this is something that as a group with Leader Character Associates, we're actually really trying to spearhead the kind of marrying up of coaching with character. And so this is an area that you have experience with as a coach, and you're becoming more interested in using character for coaching. So if there's any coaches out there listening, how are you imagining that you could kind of strengthen a coaching approach or marry up the character in coaching? Like, how would that take form, and what do you think that that could do for leaders in general?
I think it becomes quite important to look at, I mean, this sounds a bit rigorous, but a kind of certification that enables people to go into their coaching and saying that they are character coaches, that there is kind of the knowledge we've developed and I've developed over the last year. Because to think that you're going to go in superficially and just chat about a continuum and, vices and excess vices, etc., I don't think is sufficient for you to think that you can go in and call yourself a character coach. So I do think that working together with you would be the way in which you would certify by enabling them to go through a year's program, and then be able to speak the language. So it's kind of piquing their interest and saying, how interested are you in this lens, and then finding a way to certify. And then I'm not sure if more kind of conversations are needed I don't know if it's forums and panels around the importance of the work that we're doing and that you're doing, to pique an interest from the leaders who may seek it back into their coaching system. So it's kind of a push and a pull, where you want to build the coaches to come to do that and to understand its importance in terms of leadership for a country and for an organization, and then to have leaders kind of demanding it of the system. So it's kind of, I think it's twofold, but with more rigor. It's not just a conversation, and that's what I'm realizing over this year. I met your mother 10 years ago at Oxford when she first started the research, or at the beginning stages of her research, and I loved it, and I got the basics, and it felt, in retrospect now, it was so superficial. It was one module, but I think that I really think that now it can be embedded, and it's a very, very deep process that could enable coaches to speak the language and take it into organizations. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I believe it would certainly help if coaches were on the own journey themselves, because if you're on that journey, then you understand what that journey could be looking like for other people. So that would definitely help. And when you do your coaching, now that you are deepening your experience in the character area, how much would you say your conversations are around character without really without having used the character language? Like, has kind of character implicitly come up quite a bit in your coaching in the past?
Very much. I would say through the years here and there, but I would say over the past year, lots. So, looking at competency, commitment, and character, it's often a theme I bring in. The leaders that I coach are enormously competent. I mean, they are high performers. Majority of them are extremely committed to their organizations. They're very ambitious, they're driven, they're accountable. And then I bring in that character to go, okay, well, what component of it? Because obviously they come in with struggles around judgment and things that they're dealing with and decisions they need to make. And, to be situationally aware and make the judgment that they need to make, I often bring in the character components to go, what kind of courage do you think you need? What will enable you to have the courage to make that decision? So I think, yes, I do. I think I've brought it in a lot more than I ever have because I have a greater depth of understanding of its components. And another thing I really use a lot is a continuum, because we all live on a continuum actually, and our personality pulls us either way, but context, like we always, situation matters. And that can go for speaking too much and being a wallflower. That continuum can be, I'm abrupt, I'm rude, and I'm aggressive on the one side, which is, excess. And then deficiency can be, I never say anything. That is not, there might be a courage component in how much I speak in a meeting, but actually there's a direct, as you were saying, speak candidly, directly, without being aggressive and without being a wallflower. So I use some of the theory, even in some of the other areas, always bringing it back to kind of what does it mean for your character to make that choice.
Yeah, I found that continuum, like the virtues and vices, was like the aha moment for me. And it seems to be like that for so many other people. This idea that you can almost have, some people have explained it too much of a good thing, but it's not so much that. I think in a lot of other kind of leader development programs, even character development programs, they talk about dialing back things that you have of. And I feel like from a practical standpoint and a theoretical standpoint, that's not really the right approach, because these are strengths that you've worked so hard to cultivate. And if you look at this interconnected nature of character, it's actually looking for, kind of following the thread and looking at what could I strengthen to better support my integrity, like for in my example, that humanity and humility that we've been talking about. So yeah, I think that it's great that that's just coming up in your conversations, because it seems such a foundational piece that people love.
It's powerful. It resonates with all of them. No one's ever said, stop, I don't want to talk about character. No, it's too much. I'm committed and I'm competent, but no, I don't want to discuss that. Yeah.
So I do have one question left towards the end around your character quotient. But before we get there, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to get to that, that you have on your mind?
No, I just think that, the app that you've developed, there's been a lot of talk in the breakaways that we've had, etc. And I think that the Virtuosity program and app are a very, very good complementary dynamic of how you go through the process. I think it's been really good. The tool for someone that's inconsistent, we were talking last night, for someone that's inconsistent, I can't believe the degree to which I've attached myself to the app. And that's very rare. And then we were discussing why, and I think, well, because it's a why. If it matters enough, you'll do it. So I think that it's well and good, the program, and then I think the app, in terms of using a tool that can help you embed it and really think about it daily, has been an incredible thing for me to get to that consistency.
I'm so glad to hear that. And it's, it was coming up in conversation yesterday too, where I was really trying to kind of ensure people too that the app is just a tool, like a starting point. It is like that kind of net that you can come back to that creates that consistency, because everyone has their phone. Everyone's going to look at it in the morning, perhaps later in the day. Those are kind of like the two touch points that we try and embed into Virtuosity. But it really does come alive in so many different ways throughout the day. And so I love this idea of it just being kind of like this anchor piece, as a tool, but people can use it in any which way they want. But I'm remembering when we first started the program, I remember we had a conversation because the tech wasn't coming so easy to you right away. And could you share a little bit more about, because we do talk about how tech can be a barrier sometimes, and actually using a tech tool is a habit in and of itself. So could you walk through, I don't know if you remember back in January.
I do.
Okay, so just how you kind of, and perhaps had to rely on your character to get used to the new tech tool.
Tenacity and resilience. don't know what it was. I'm one of those people that's kind of in the middle on tech. I can embrace it and go there with AI and listen and see, and then I can kind of like regress by even looking at satellite television programming, and then I start to get worried. And so there's this, I've got sort of two sides. I think for me it was pushing through, but I think the one thing that I did was I stopped I started to just explore. I went in and I just explored and I pressed and touched and I just thought, don't let it be a block on something that you deem so important. There was someone last night on our one session who said that, and it was an interesting process. She starts on the app, but then she needs her piece of paper, and then she goes to her piece of paper and she writes certain things down. So I think we all form our own processes. But I have just pushed through, and I think that that's made the difference. I just started to think, it's not going to break. The phone won't break and the tool won't break, which is sort of very indicative of my age, but that's kind of like what I did. And it was not difficult to overcome. Not difficult to overcome at all.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such a great way to explain it, because I definitely would have been someone that would get frustrated with tech, but not even tech. Just I think about just anything that you try and solve in life, whether it's, you know, something breaking down in your house or your car. And it's been this piece that you're talking about. It's almost like a curiosity. Like, can you just explore this without perhaps a time expectation, and know that as you explore, you'll figure things out? And so I've that really resonates with me too. And I think that's a really good kind of piece of advice for if anyone is starting to use the app themselves or in a future program.
Yeah.
And it does come relatively quickly. I think it seems it's overwhelming at first, but if you just give it a little bit of time, it does become manageable for sure.
Easy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so on to our last question here. So I typically ask everyone as we're ending, what is your character quotient? So we have an assessment that Mary and I put together. There's an article in Forbes that she's written about this, and there's essentially 3 sections to it for the listeners that may not know what it is. So there's a set of questions which is around what's your awareness of character. The next 4 questions are around what does your development of character look like? And then the last 2 is, are you embedding character into kind of your systems, your organization? So I've asked you to take the assessment. Would you mind sharing with me and the listeners how that assessment went for you, and perhaps areas that you're really proud of, areas that you've noticed change since you've been doing the program, and perhaps if there's an area that you think you still want to work on?
Okay, so I know that my transcendence and humanity are good. They're good. And I think it is as a result of my environment, and I think it's as a result of my upbringing, etc. So in terms of being creative, purposeful, magnanimous, I know that those are okay. And yes, I'm sure there's stuff that I need to understand about them, but I think that they're not bad. They're not something that I'm like really concerned about. What I am concerned about in a very critical self sort of negative internal dialogue is my temperance.
Mm-hmm.
And my drive, and not because my drive is not an important component of moving forward and doing stuff, but I think that I have an enormous, I do things at an enormous speed, very quickly. So when I'm driven to do something, and the 2 correlate for me, I'm extremely expressive, so I'm not always controlled when I'm driven. So my temperance affects that drive. So I become impatient, sometimes not controlled as much as I would like to be. And it's fascinating because if my coaching clients were to hear me speak like this, they would think that I was a foreign and I was alien. Because obviously when I go into a coaching environment, none of myself comes through, very little. So they may get a tone, they must get something, that there's a drive and that there's, but we go into a very compassionate, sort of, what would the word be? A very future-oriented, optimistic kind of, fair relationship. It's equal status partnerships when you're coaching. You're equal partners. It's not like you're the coach and this is the coachee, and you have conversations that are very kind of adult to adult. And so as a result of that, I'm extremely humble, and I'm very, I'm much more contained. And when I find myself under pressure or worried about something or anxious about something or the state of the country or what's going on, and my conviction rises around what I think is right and wrong, I go into a state of temperance not being great. I get impatient. I become extremely expressive. in a way that's not as controlled as I'd like. So I think those are things, and I think that, yes, I've sort of become better at them, being more aware, but I don't think it's something you stop wanting to grow around. Well, for me, certainly, And obviously the closer you come to home, the easier it is to be impatient. The way you've packed the dishwasher is like a raccoon on crack. Sorry, that's not great. I really need that to be redone. Otherwise, I'm going to redo it myself like a Swedish architect. So there's this thing around, and it's not great. I just don't think it's great. And yes, I'm making sort of fun of it, and there's a bit of humor, and thank God there's humor. But the context of my environment sometimes means that I'm under pressure, and then I'm not my best behaved.
Yeah, I think that awareness and in the character quotient questions that we have, it's like, is your character dependent on context? And it almost, for better or for worse. And actually, what I was just picking up from what you were saying around your coaching, that perhaps actually it activates certain dimensions in you that are typically weaker in other parts of your life. Like maybe your coaching activates your temperance, your humility. And it's kind of interesting to think about why are those conditions activating that in you? And can you draw on that context elsewhere to bring more of like that coaching lens as well? I did a very brief coaching training, just a 2-day thing to kind of dip my toes into coaching, no certificate or anything. But I was really surprised with how it did those similar things as well. Like it activated temperance and humility in me, which are the dimensions that struggle a little bit more for me, because you're so focused on asking questions and finding out more about another person. And it struck me, wow, if I could bring this type of approach to all the other conversations I have, I feel like, my character would be much more well-rounded. So it's really interesting how we can see context actually activating certain dimensions for us and how we can try and bring that into other areas of our life.
When I was talking to you and Mary a while ago about this whole thing and the coaching and character, I do think something happens in a room when you've been doing this for very many years, and there's something intuitive that happens. And coaching is very much about judgment. What do I ask? And being situationally aware around very complex, cognitively complex situations with leaders. You have to be on your game. It can't be about you because you're in that moment and you're thinking partner with this person. So, and I do think there is something else that happens for me that, sometimes I sit there and I think, I wonder where that came from. And I think there becomes something when you've practiced enough. It's the same as practicing anything in character. When you've kind of practiced this intuition around what you receive and how you receive it, it enables you to be of service to that person. And I think that's what coaching is. It's like you're of service. And when you're of service, it's not about you and your temperance. It's not about you and your kind of courage or your drive. It's about you intuitively serving this person in a very complex situation. And I think that that's kind of me realizing that it's a very special space, the coaching space, that goes beyond what you're about. And I think that for me that is why it feeds me, I think, because it's just an amazingly rewarding process.
And, it was just striking me too. We had talked a lot about how we could bring character into coaching as a tool, but actually just how beneficial it is for coaches to be aware of their character and how they're showing up for their clients.
Actually,
it just seems like such a powerful piece. So as we are winding down here, is there anything that we haven't covered? I just want to make sure that you said everything you feel that you wanted to say, but no pressure to add anything.
No, I'm very comfortable. If you are?
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Adelle, for taking the time to share all of your insights today. It's so nice. It's just inspiring, actually, to have someone so committed to the program like you've been, and then seeing all these other opportunities like the PhD questions that you have and how you can really marry up all of your passions like coaching, character, democracy. It's really inspiring. So I'm really excited to see what comes next for you. And thanks for taking the time to share today.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
You have just finished another episode from the Virtuosity podcast. If you have any questions and want to connect, please reach out to me at corey@virtuositycharacter.ca. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. As always, thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.